The atmosphere in the east wing of the White House felt motionless, as though trapped in a moment. A slight breeze drifted faintly through the hallways, chillier than one would expect for spring. The shadows cast by the elaborate gaslight fixtures appeared unnaturally long, flickering along the marble walls like indistinct figures. Room 74, commonly called the Lincoln Bedroom by the staff, remained quiet. Yet those who had passed it during the late-night hours insisted that silence was never truly what they encountered. In the early decades of the 20th century, strange stories began to circulate. Initially, these were hushed reports from cleaning crews and nighttime security. Doors opening without wind, the sound of heavy footsteps on the hardwood, and a feeling of being watched. The narratives grew more intense during the presidency of Harmon Keller, a rigid and practical leader who had served in the Great War and dismissed superstition until the year 1946. That spring, Keller's personal valet, a discreet man named William Dorset, submitted a confidential report. According to his statement, around 2:15 in the morning, while carrying the president's overcoat to his room, Dorset passed by room 74 and heard a voice. It was a man's voice, speaking slowly and deliberately, as though engaged in a serious discussion. When he stopped outside the door, it became evident there was only one voice. No radio, no visitors present. The room had been secured. Dorset held a duplicate of the service key and, driven equally by fear and responsibility, entered. The fireplace showed no warmth. The windows were firmly shut. Yet the distinct aroma of pipe tobacco remained in the atmosphere, as if someone had just been there moments before leaving. On the usually tidy desk lay a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was uneven, angled, and penned in dark ink. The Union must hold. That message was never revealed to the public. It was handed over to Keller's chief of staff and soon vanished. Dorset continued working for another year, but stayed away from the East Wing afterward. From that point on, tales grew louder, not just from the staff, but from the president himself. In a rare confidential letter to Eleanor Merwin, a close friend from his congressional days, Harmon Keller described a repetitive dream. In it, he stood by a window, gazing out over a nation engulfed in flames, while behind him, a tall figure dressed in black observed silently. The figure never uttered a word. This vision visited him 5 times between May and September, always identical, always mute. Psychophysiologists of that era regarded these stories as signs of extreme fatigue. The war had only recently come to a close. The demands of reconstructing Europe and managing the Soviet challenge placed immense strain on those in power. However, one individual, Dr. Harold Beechcroft, a civilian consultant to the Surgeon General, composed a confidential paper proposing that the White House itself might induce an elevated state of neural resonance during extended intervals of political tension. In that document, now preserved in the Naval Medical Institute archives, Beechcroft discussed the architectural changes made in the early 19th century. The reinforcement of the structure using load-bearing steel beams, which created narrow electromagnetic zones within specific wings. He paid particular attention to room 74. His theory was straightforward, yet unverified. Prolonged exposure to these resonant fields in times of intense emotion, especially among people already suffering from sleep loss or political anxiety, could cause vivid hypnagogic hallucinations. These were visions that felt completely genuine, with sensory impressions resembling real external events. He did not assert the presence of ghosts, but also did not entirely reject the idea of recorded human presence in settings marked by significant historical trauma. Keller's reports gradually disappeared from public attention, mainly because he chose not to speak about them openly. However, during the winter of 1952, these stories resurfaced under a new administration. President Raymond Holstein, who succeeded Keller and was a devout Catholic, moved his family into the White House shortly after his inauguration. His wife, Claire, developed a keen interest in the history of the residence, frequently exploring the rooms and interviewing staff in hopes of writing a private memoir. One afternoon, Claire Holston spent several hours alone in the Lincoln bedroom. She said she was searching for inspiration and wanted to absorb the historical atmosphere. When she left, her face was pale and her hands were shaking. From that day on, she never returned to the East Wing. A private memo, written by her personal assistant, Alice Fenmore, describes the First Lady's behavior after the event. She experienced insomnia, a sudden fear of certain rooms, and became obsessed with redrawing the White House's floor plans. Claire repeatedly mentioned architectural echoes and warned Alice not to trust any reflection in the mirror of that room, as it revealed what it wishes to show, not the reality. President Holston commanded the room to be sealed after an evening in November, when their youngest daughter claimed she saw the tall man in black standing beside her bed. A Secret Service investigation found no intruders. A mirror in the girl's room, which Claire had requested be brought from room 74, was removed and destroyed after it cracked from the inside. None of these details were ever made public. However, behind closed doors, a subtle pattern began to emerge. Always the same room. Always during moments of intense political strain. Always descriptions of the identical figure. In 1956, journalist and historian Alan Wexley was granted limited access to White House maintenance archives as part of his study on post-war presidential routines. Among these records, he discovered repeated mentions of unusual electrical fluctuations in the East Wing wiring, flickering lights and blown fuses, especially on nights with high atmospheric pressure. These disturbances matched several critical dates: Dorset's sighting, Claire Holston's breakdown, and even a mysterious episode during an official reception in 1949, when guests reported a sense of dread moving along the hallway leading to room 74. Wexley's discoveries were never published. 2 months later, he suffered a breakdown and was confined to a private sanitarium near Philadelphia. The documents he had obtained disappeared from all records. Yet the stories kept living on. Not just idle rumors or office chatter, but persistent whispers that remained consistent and detailed through the years. No one ever claimed to have had direct contact. Not a single story included threats or aggression. Yet the presence endured. It was not seen by the eyes, but sensed deeply. A tightness on the chest, a soft murmur from the stairs, a shadow moving just at the edge of a mirror. The Lincoln bedroom stayed unused for long stretches. Still, every administration eventually faced whatever lingered there, not out of choice, but because the House demanded their attention. The year was 1959. The country teetered on the brink of anxious uncertainty. Abroad, the Cold War grew colder with each passing month, while inside the United States, civil unrest quietly brewed beneath the surface. The White House, long a symbol of stability and strength, now harbored a silent unease no one openly admitted, but everyone secretly feared. President Warren E. Radfield, who had won on a promise of steady, pragmatic leadership and domestic calm, was not a man given to emotions. As a former prosecutor, he guarded his private life from the media and approached his presidential duties with cold precision. Yet, during his third year in office, his administration became among the most subtly haunted chapters of presidential history, not due to politics, but because of what started to unfold within those walls. During that winter, a junior Secret Service agent named Lester Caney made an official log entry that, in usual situations, would have been dismissed as a simple mistake. He noted that between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, while on patrol in the West Corridor, he saw a light turn on inside the Lincoln bedroom. The door was locked and no one had been inside for several days. Curious, Caney went to check it out. His report, now only available in scattered, declassified fragments, described how he approached the room and heard a slow, creaking noise like weight shifting on aged floorboards. When he opened the door, the room was empty except for a single lamp on the writing desk. He switched it off, inspected the room, and locked the door behind him. However, just minutes after returning to his post, he looked at the security camera at the end of the corridor, an early film-based system for presidential protection, and saw the light was on again. He reviewed the footage 2 times. The second time, the lamp was off. Caney never submitted a follow-up report, yet what others would soon experience was far more disturbing. In late January of that year, the First Lady, Margaret Radfield, extended an invitation to her cousin, Josephine Lambert, to stay at the White House during an especially cold spell. Josephine, a school teacher from Baltimore, had always been captivated by American history and asked to spend her first night in the Lincoln bedroom to fully experience it. Margaret hesitated but consented, instructing the staff to prepare the room as thoroughly as possible. The room had remained unused since the Holston administration, and the maids were reluctant to clean it. Among the senior staff, in hushed Spanish or rushed French, there were murmurs about a persistent coldness surrounding the bed, books opening on their own, and mirrors briefly showing figures that were not present. That evening at 9:30, Josephine entered the room carrying a book and a glass of brandy. By dawn, she was discovered sitting upright in bed, fully clothed, eyes wide open and shaking uncontrollably. She was unable to utter a word for nearly 2 full days. When she finally spoke, her words were few and uncertain, whispered quietly to the family doctor. She said that during the night she had been awakened by the sound of crying. At first soft, then growing steadily louder. The room was dark. The light switch would not turn on. She told how she tried to call out, but found her voice lost to her. Then, in the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the tall windows, she spotted the figure, tall, thin, dressed in black, standing near the fireplace. It did not look directly at her, but seemed to gaze through the wall, its mouth moving without a sound. Josephine was convinced she was dreaming. She reached for the lamp. The light came on. The figure vanished. Yet she insisted that her own reflection was still watching her. The official statement released to the media said that Miss Lambert had experienced a mild nervous breakdown caused by exhaustion from travel. She returned to Baltimore under supervision and never spoke again about her night at the White House. President Radfield, after learning the full story, ordered the room to be sealed off from any visitors indefinitely. Later, he confided in his chief of staff, Marcus Blythe, that he had heard noises during the night in that section of the residence, slow footsteps on the floorboards, faint knocks, and a whisper he could never fully understand. He refused to relocate his bedroom and insisted that the matter remain private. "This house holds too much history," he wrote in a private letter. "And some of it still wants to be heard." During that very same winter, Dr. Everett Malden, a neuroscientist affiliated with the University of Pennsylvania, received an invitation to the White House under the pretext of assessing lighting conditions and their influence on the president's sleep patterns. Yet, the reality behind his visit was far more intricate. He was granted discreet access to architectural plans, permitted to examine the electrical wiring, the overall layout, and even allowed to explore the East Wing unaccompanied during the night. Within a confidential report found among Malden's personal belongings after his passing, he documented unusual magnetic fields detected beneath the Lincoln bedroom. These fields could not be linked to any recognized power source. Malden also observed slight irregularities in the positioning of the bed relative to these magnetic anomalies, and proposed that this misalignment might cause minor disturbances in the function of the pineal gland during phases of deep sleep. Nevertheless, his findings did not conclude with scientific certainty, but with an open-ended statement. The final sentence read, "This is no longer about architecture. Something else is present here, lingering, intelligent, and selective in its manifestation." Malden never returned to the White House again. In the spring of that very year, another incident took place, less known but equally unsettling. A tour guide named Sylvia Henwick, who worked on weekends leading historical tours through the East Wing, recounted that during one early afternoon tour, a child separated from the group and entered the Lincoln bedroom. This door had been left unlocked because of a mix-up with the maintenance crew. By the time Sylvia caught up with the boy, no older than 9 years, he was standing silently before the mirror. Turning to her, he spoke with an unnatural calm. He does not like to be watched. When Sylvia tried to ask him more, the boy simply walked by her and returned to the group. His parents insisted he never said a word. That same evening, Sylvia became severely ill with a high fever and never resumed her role. These events were never made public. However, inside the White House, the mood shifted. Staff hesitated to enter the East Wing after dark. Lights stayed on all night long. Although the room was not locked down, it was quietly renamed Storage Room E in internal files. The original name was removed from nearly all records, as if erasing it could banish its presence. Yet it persisted, hidden, nameless, waiting patiently. By the middle of the 1960s, the nation's atmosphere shifted from cautious alertness to internal unrest. The White House, now led by President Harold C. Winthrop, became a stronghold for tough decisions. Civil rights protests swept through southern cities. Vietnam appeared like a distant, looming blaze, and inside the corridors of power, tensions hummed like hidden currents beneath the building's surface. President Winthrop was not one to entertain guesswork. Educated in law and shaped by the post-war hopefulness of the late 40s, he tackled every issue with a steady, methodical determination. This is exactly why his private notes from the winter of 1965 feel so profoundly disturbing. In an undated, handwritten letter addressed simply to PR, believed by experts to be his speechwriter and trusted advisor Peter Renholm, Winthrop wrote, "It is not death that unsettles me in this place, but that which tries so desperately to resemble life." The meaning of this line remained a mystery until additional papers emerged decades later from a sealed estate box sold at auction in Virginia. Among these documents were confidential memos from the First Lady's office that reported odd disturbances during a series of official photographs taken inside the Lincoln bedroom. The photo session, arranged for the March anniversary of President Lincoln's death, was intended to symbolize continuity, a tradition, a gesture of remembrance. However, the photographer, a seasoned professional named Aaron Halley, encountered several unusual occurrences. Photos becoming blurry without any clear reason, odd reflections near the mirror despite all the lights being calibrated and stable, and on 2 of the shots, a faint outline appeared behind the drapes. A figure that did not resemble any of the staff or the furnishings. The White House personnel attempted to disregard these oddities. Halley, though, was adamant about developing every negative himself. One image, which was never made public, revealed what he called an incomplete shadow emerging from the floor without any visible source. Although that film was destroyed, Halley recorded a drawing of the figure in his notebook. A slim, slightly bent figure with elongated arms and what looked like a beard, positioned exactly where President Lincoln's actual bed once stood. During that same week, the youngest advisor to President Winthrop, 27-year-old Michael Thorne, was discovered asleep on the floor outside the locked door to the room. He seemed confused and could not remember how he ended up there. Thorne explained to White House physician Dr. Ellis Morov that he had slipped into a blank trance while retrieving documents. He recalled hearing a voice, a low, repeated phrase sounding like, "It must be finished. It must be finished." Afterwards, Thorne was quietly reassigned to a desk job in the old executive office building and never returned to the president's immediate circle. Dr. Morov, however, grew more and more intrigued. As a natural rationalist, he perceived patterns rather than spirits. During the summer of that year, he presented a private psychological report on what he called empathic contagion phenomena in structures of national trauma. In his analysis, he suggested that the White House might serve as a container not for ghosts, but for unresolved collective sorrow. His hypothesis relied on the belief that intense historical emotions, especially grief linked to violent death or political turmoil, could leave delicate traces on architecture, particularly in a building constantly inhabited by people experiencing severe psychological strain. He observed that the Lincoln bedroom had undergone various transformations. Originally a cabinet room during Lincoln's presidency, later converted into a guest suite, and eventually becoming a symbolic memorial by the middle of the 20th century. Morov stated, "This is a space filled with psychic contradictions, an altar erected upon practical use. It is not that something dwells inside, but that something is perpetually recalled into existence." He ended with a warning. Never underestimate the unconscious mind of a nation. It dreams too. These reflections might have stayed simple, theoretical ideas, if not for the event that occurred on October 21st of the very same year. At exactly 2:40 in the morning, two Secret Service agents named Victor Renly and Isaac Morales were carrying out their routine inspection of the upper floors when they discovered the door to the Lincoln bedroom wide open. The room had been securely locked since the photo shoot held in March. Both agents were recognized for their strict adherence to protocol. They approached calmly, their weapons holstered but not fully secured. Later, they each submitted identical written reports, a rare situation that hinted at either perfect coordination or true precision. Initially, nothing seemed out of place inside the room. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply. Renly's watch reportedly cracked on its underside. The lamp next to the desk flickered even though there were no electrical issues reported. Then, both agents heard it. A dragging noise. Not heavy like moving a piece of furniture. Rather light and rhythmic, resembling the slow movement of a long coat's hem gliding over polished wood. They turned toward the corner by the fireplace and both claimed to see it. A faint figure standing still. The light pulsed one final time. Then the figure vanished. Morales declined to continue with night shifts and asked for a transfer to the West Coast within 3 weeks. Renly stayed on the team but spoke rarely outside of official meetings. The following morning, President Winthrop asked for the room to be blessed by a priest from St. Matthew's Cathedral. This ceremony was not included in the official White House itinerary, and the priest's identity has been erased from all existing records. The impact of this blessing was never verified. However, throughout the rest of Winthrop's time in office, the Lincoln bedroom remained locked at all times except for state inspections or cleaning conducted under strict supervision. No one was permitted to sleep there or be alone inside. Despite this, the presence continued to reveal itself, not only in the East Wing but in more subtle ways across the residence. Staff members reported missing items returning mysteriously to drawers. Speeches were found rewritten in an unfamiliar handwriting. On one occasion, a note card appeared in the president's address on April 15th, bearing the words, "One nation under great strain." Nobody on the team admitted to adding it. The card vanished after the speech. This chapter was later called "The Quiet Haunting" by those working inside. There were no dramatic incidents or violence, only an ongoing feeling that some history remained unresolved. Perhaps a figure who had spoken countless warnings into the very walls was still waiting for someone to hear. It was never merely about sightings. It was the recurrence, the uniformity, the manner in which those residing in the White House found themselves uttering words they could not recall saying. Lingering near the corridor outside the Lincoln bedroom as though pulled towards something more ancient than memory itself. Older than the house it occupied. No one asserted seeing a ghost, yet everyone concurred. The Lincoln bedroom was never truly vacant. During the last years of the 1970s, the White House welcomed a new president, Matthew D. Callaway, a former governor of Minnesota, recognized for his composed nature and measured rhetoric. Elected amid a nation weary from economic turmoil and scandal, Calloway's administration aimed to exude steadiness. Still, behind the closed doors, a heavy tension lingered throughout the corridors, and the Lincoln bedroom, once again marked on official residence maps, resumed its silent watchfulness. In the second year of his administration, a scheduled refurbishment of the East Wing necessitated the temporary reassignment of several employees to rooms usually left unused. Among these was Sylvia Barris, a senior archivist working for the National Historical Commission. Her responsibility involved conducting a comprehensive inventory of documents and artifacts linked to presidencies during the Civil War, including original speech drafts, wartime correspondences, and letters from the post-war period stored in the White House basement levels. The Lincoln bedroom, due to its historical significance, was selected as an appropriate temporary workspace for her nighttime review sessions. Barris was meticulous in her work. She arrived every evening shortly after 6 o'clock and stayed until midnight, organizing materials without a single complaint. On her 12th night, she recorded an unusual observation in her personal journal. "There is a sound in this room that does not come from the wood or the wind. It resembles paper rustling beneath the floorboards. Initially, I believed it was a draft, but the windows are completely sealed." She added, "Then I heard a knock behind the mirror. It was soft but unmistakable. 3 slow knocks. I checked the hallway, which was completely empty." During that same week, she notified the maintenance supervisor about a possible issue with the air vents in the Lincoln bedroom. She reported hearing a metallic humming sound that started after 9 at night and disappeared shortly after midnight. The technicians inspected the vents thoroughly but found no problems. There were no devices inside, and no air circulation was detected in that area of the residence since it had been shut off because of budget limitations. A couple of nights later, she woke up in her Georgetown apartment to find her hands covered in ink. Her fingers were stained black, yet her desk remained untouched. She had no recollection of writing anything, but her wastebasket was full of crumpled note cards, all of them blank. She returned to work the following day, but requested to be relocated to a different room without offering any explanation. At around the same period, President Calloway started having intense dreams. In confidential notes kept by White House doctor Harland Vogt, the president described repeated visions of a narrow hallway lined with bookshelves, none of which matched those in the actual residence. In the dream, he would walk down the corridor until he reached a closed door. It was always the same one, large, wooden, with a brass handle. Each time he reached for it, he woke up with a bitter taste of ash lingering in his mouth. Dr. Vogt recommended gentle sedatives. They proved ineffective. The dreams persisted. During one meeting of the cabinet, the president accidentally called the Treasury Secretary Mr. Nicolay. Nobody present recognized this name. Subsequent investigation identified him as John Nicolay, who had been Lincoln's personal secretary during the war. When questioned, Calloway stated he did not remember making that remark. Additional reports started coming from lower-level staff. Beatrice Dorr, a cleaning supervisor, shared that linens placed on the bed in the Lincoln room appeared rumpled the next morning, as though someone had used them. She confirmed all the keys were accounted for. No one had entered the room. On another occasion, Alvin Jesper, a guard, claimed he saw flickering candlelight through the keyhole, yet there were no candles in the room, only electric sconces. Jesper faced disciplinary action for what was considered unsubstantiated reports and was quietly reassigned to a minor position at the Naval Observatory. However, he left a note for a colleague that was found years later in a donated collection. He stands at the window, not looking out, looking in. The president's youngest daughter, Abigail, who was 12 years old at the time, had her own unique experience. While on a Saturday tour with visiting friends, she accidentally wandered into the Lincoln bedroom after taking a wrong turn. The door had been left slightly open. She recalled seeing a man seated at the desk, writing with his back turned to her. She quietly apologized and stepped away. When she returned shortly after with a friend, the chair was empty and felt cold to touch. No adults believed her story, yet she refused to come near that part of the East Wing for the rest of her father's presidency. Even during formal occasions, she would avoid that area completely. The situation grew more intense in October of the same year, when a structural team arrived to investigate reports of slight warping in the ceiling of the Lincoln bedroom. What seemed like a routine inspection uncovered something far more extraordinary. Beneath a loose floorboard in the far corner beside the writing desk, a technician found a sealed envelope. Its paper was yellowed with age and the wax seal badly cracked. The envelope showed no postage or date. Inside was a folded piece of parchment bearing a message written in a distinct 19th century handwriting. "I do not sleep. I wait. I remember." No signature appeared on the note. No accompanying document existed. The ink had seeped slightly into the paper's texture. The Library of Congress was asked to verify the note, yet no match was identified among handwriting samples of any known president or government official. Instead of pursuing further inquiry, the White House administrative team chose to close the Lincoln bedroom indefinitely, classifying it as under preservation review. They offered no explanation to the media. President Callaway never spoke about the room publicly. However, in one of his final letters to a former aide, he wrote a mysterious line: "There are stories inside this place that do not want to end." By the time his term ended, the Lincoln bedroom was removed from visitor maps. It became essentially invisible, at least by name. Yet something lingered there. A presence that never departed. A silence so deep it could almost be heard. Not every night, but frequently enough. In the opening weeks of January in the year 1989, President Howard Belridge took office beneath a somber sky over a divided nation. Although the Cold War was beginning to ease, tensions still ran high. The economy faltered. The wounds from previous administrations continued to ache. His victory speech was short and plain, filled with blunt statements and pledges to bring decency back to the institution. Belridge held no illusions about the White House. To him, it was not a place to live, but rather a stage to perform on. He spent only a few nights each week in the residence, and when he did, he chose the bedroom farthest from the East Wing. However, it was his chief of staff, Thomas Cray, who insisted that the president should at least occasionally use the Lincoln bedroom to show confidence and honor tradition. Cray explained it was merely a symbol. Belridge agreed and ordered the room to be reopened. 2 weeks later, a steward responsible for preparing the bed noticed deep impressions in the mattress, even though no one had slept there. The pillows appeared disturbed, with faint marks in the center as if someone had been sitting, leaning forward. The steward, who had been working in the residence for 10 years, recorded the irregularity in his log but did not mention it to anyone else. Over the following month, similar strange occurrences grew more frequent. Curtains were found drawn shut in the morning despite being opened the previous night. A strong smell of dried tobacco and old paper lingered in the air stubbornly, even after multiple cleanings. One maid refused to enter the room after seeing the dresser mirror completely fog up, as if misted from the inside. Soon it was the Secret Service who began to grow worried. While recalibrating security systems, a technician examining archived footage from hallway cameras discovered something unnoticed for more than 8 consecutive nights. At precisely 3:51 in the morning, a shadow would move behind the frosted glass at the distant end of the East Wing corridor. Taller than any staff member on duty, always traveling the same path. From the farthest window towards the Lincoln bedroom, agents verified duty rosters. No personnel were recorded in that hallway. The footage was presented to the Chief of Security. An investigation started but was concluded without any public disclosure after 10 days. President Belridge outwardly appeared indifferent. He dismissed belief in ghost stories. Yet behind closed doors, his anxiety deepened. His personal assistant, Helen Verst, noticed behavioral shifts. During briefings, he would pause as if sensing something beyond the walls. He frequently inquired whether any paintings had been relocated in the Lincoln bedroom. None had been moved. One evening, following a lengthy budget meeting, Belridge tried to rest in the room. He entered just before midnight. 2 guards stayed posted outside. At 6:30, the president appeared, pale and quiet. He returned to his private living area and never spoke of the room again. Later that week, he confided in his brother during a private phone conversation. "I woke up to find the fireplace burning. It was not a dream. I saw the flames. There was no wood, just a flame floating there, and then it disappeared." This conversation was recorded by a communications assistant. Although it was not labeled as an official record, the transcript would later emerge during archival examinations. The White House doctor, Dr. Lena Marek, paid close attention. As a neurologist by profession, she started a discreet investigation, collecting informal accounts from the night staff and aides. What she uncovered unsettled her far more than expected. A pattern began to form. Those who regularly worked near the Lincoln bedroom experienced disrupted sleep. Some mentioned hearing typing sounds at unusual hours, a steady rhythm faintly audible through the walls. Others reported sensing a presence that could not be seen but was deeply felt. A tangible weight in the room, as if someone was watching, not with curiosity but with judgment. Dr. Marek suggested conducting an experiment. She organized a small team from the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences to inspect the room under the pretense of assessing air quality. Their results were inconclusive, except for one discovery: a resonance frequency. At exactly 132 Hz, the room vibrated, barely audible to the human ear, but undeniably there. No equipment could explain it. It did not correspond to the building's electrical systems. This frequency was strongest near the fireplace. The team categorized it as an architectural anomaly. However, Marek suspected something different. She contacted Dr. Wallace Klemper, a cognitive scientist who specializes in hypnagogic hallucinations, those unusual, semi-conscious images that appear in the space between being awake and falling asleep. Klemper quietly shared his theory with Marek that prolonged exposure to certain subsonic sounds might disrupt sleep patterns, provoke auditory hallucinations, and even create the sensation of a presence in the room. He clarified, not spirits, rather the body reacting to memories as if they were actual stimuli. These walls, after enduring trauma over time, could transform into psychological reflections. Marek was convinced until the night she decided to enter the room alone. According to her written statement, she arrived shortly after midnight with a notebook and an audio recorder. She sat at the desk and waited for 28 minutes without any unusual events. Then she described an abrupt pressure on her right shoulder, as if someone was standing behind her. The air became dry and her eyes started to water. Suddenly, there was a sound, typing. It was not coming from the recorder, nor from outside. It came directly from the desk under her hands. The keys pressed themselves once. She immediately stood up and ran out. The next morning, she asked to be transferred to a military hospital in Maryland, giving no explanation. The president also retreated from the East Wing. By late autumn, the Lincoln bedroom was closed off once again. Security files regarding the area were classified. One staff member humorously called it the locked door without a key. Inside the residence, however, anxiety returned. It was no longer dismissed as simple superstition. Too many had experienced it. Too many had left without explanation. Those who stayed began avoiding that part of the house altogether. By that time, a reality had settled deep in the White House's very structure. Something was present. It did not scream or sob. It simply waited. Every night between 3 and 4 in the morning, the quiet slightly shifted. as if a page had been quietly turned or someone had leaned in to finish what was started over 100 years ago. The winter of the year 2000 arrived in Washington without fanfare. The wind pressed hard against the Potomac River while the trees stood bare, stiff like guards. A new administration was preparing to arrive. Hallways were lined with packing crates. Velvet ropes separated the Red Room, the Blue Room, and the East Wing. Furniture was inventoried and artwork was taken for restoration, yet one room remained untouched. The Lincoln bedroom stayed locked, curtains drawn since the early months of President Belridge's term. But someone had opened it. Just 2 days before the inauguration of the new president, a maintenance worker named Louis Marron, a quiet individual with no previous signs of distress, failed to show up at his assigned location. When security personnel started their inspection, they discovered the Lincoln bedroom door slightly open. Inside, the lights flickered intermittently. The room was empty except for Maron's work belt lying on the floor next to the desk. His flashlight remained on, its batteries recently replaced. An extensive search was initiated. Blueprints were examined carefully. The entire East Wing was scrutinized. There were no indications of any struggle, no fingerprints, no signs of disruption. Later, Maron's personnel file was sealed on the instructions of the residence manager. No formal report ever came out. His disappearance remains a mystery to this very day. The newly elected president, William Harmon, came to the White House with promises of renewal. Young, self-assured, and free from scandal, Harmon arrived with his wife, Eleanor, and their 2 sons, eager to revive the symbolic significance of the presidency. During a private press luncheon in his first week, he announced that the Lincoln bedroom would be reopened to visitors, restored with full historical accuracy, and reintegrated into the public tour route. Restoration teams arrived within days. Fresh linens were spread. The wood was polished thoroughly. Carpets were vacuumed. Portraits were carefully rehung. Yet from the very start of these efforts, something went awry. The rooms simply refused to remain clean. The bed linens, freshly ironed, revealed faint indentations every morning. Not footprints or stains, but shallow, exact marks, as if elbows or knees had rested there for long hours. Twice, the temperature in the room inexplicably dropped, even though the thermostats were fully operational. A bouquet of roses left on the nightstand wilted by morning. It was not due to neglect since they were fresh the night before. Restorers experienced headaches, dizziness, and nausea after spending more than an hour inside. One woman named Teresa Gay said she heard whispers coming from the closet. She quit the following day and later told a newspaper, "It was not words, it was breath." Like someone was about to speak but never did. President Harrow was undeterred. In his 3rd month in office, he invited a documentary team to create a short film about the White House's architectural history. Among the crew was Franklin Yates, a sound engineer carrying highly sensitive recording equipment designed to capture faint vibrations and anomalies for post-production cleanup. On the 3rd night of filming, Yates left his recorder running overnight in the Lincoln bedroom to collect ambient sound. The next morning, he retrieved the device. The audio was analyzed 2 days later. At first, it was ordinary. Occasional creaks from the old building and soft hums from the ventilation. But at the 3-hour, 52-minute mark, everything changed. Footsteps, slow, unsteady. Then came the sound of a chair being pulled back, followed by the distinct clicking of typewriter keys. It was not a rapid typing, only a single word at a time. Then silence, then another word. This sequence repeated 4 times. After that, there was breathing. Deep, harsh, human. Yates, who had spent 30 years in production, quit on that very day. The recording was handed over to the residence director and stored away. It was not destroyed or denied, simply concealed. By midsummer, whispers returned, though they were never openly spoken of. Visitors avoided the East Wing after dark. the residence staff developed the habit of leaving fresh water outside the Lincoln bedroom without going inside. No one could explain the reason, but it soon became a regular practice. President Harrow began to change. His speeches became hesitant. His pauses grew longer. At one press conference, he stopped mid-sentence, looked toward the camera lights, and said, "He's still waiting." This was dismissed as a momentary lapse, but those closest to Harrow grew uneasy. He started wandering alone at night. One guard found him standing silently before the locked door of the Lincoln bedroom just before dawn. The president said nothing and went back to his room. Harrow later revealed to his personal advisor that he had begun to experience the same dream repeatedly. In the vision, he proceeded down a hallway lined with mirrors. Every mirror reflected him standing motionless, except for one. That single mirror revealed a tall man with hollow eyes and a stovepipe hat, seated at the desk in the Lincoln bedroom, endlessly writing. His pen never left the paper. The noise of scratching echoed throughout the dream. Then came the final scene. The man ceased writing, lifted his gaze, and stared straight into the mirror, directly at him. That autumn, during a standard examination of the attic space above the Lincoln bedroom, a civil engineer uncovered a collection of forgotten boxes squeezed between the upper beams. Inside were pages of handwritten letters never before recorded. The sheets bore no dates. Although the ink was faint, the text remained readable. Most were draft correspondences, reflections on wartime, and bits of speeches. Yet one unsigned note stood out, marked twice with a red circle. History is not shaped by the living alone. Memory must be inhabited to endure, and in this house, memory has found form. No author was confirmed. However, the handwriting showed a remarkable similarity to that of President Lincoln. The document was quietly sent to the Library of Congress, wrapped in a sealed envelope. No official record of its receipt was ever acknowledged. Today, the Lincoln bedroom is still part of the official residence, yet it is seldom used. The room receives weekly cleaning, but never after dark. No guests are ever assigned to stay there. The fireplace stands empty. Despite this, some visitors occasionally notice a scent, burnt paper mixed with old tobacco. Subtle but persistent. They mention feeling as if someone is watching them, not with hostility, but with a sense of anticipation. The White House has declined to provide any public statements on this matter. Thus, the question lingers: who truly inhabits the Lincoln bedroom? It may not be a ghost in the usual sense, but rather something that persists beyond life itself. A presence born from memory, sorrow, responsibility, and silence. Deep within the mansion, behind a secured door, the past remains awake. It waits,